We're here with Ed and Lisa today, and we're talking about planning an RV trip. So, Ed, you were recently talking about a cross-country trip that you had planned.
I was, Jim. So one of the very first trips that I ever took in an RV, I hadn't heard of fantasy RV tours at all. We planned a trip from Florida all the way out to California and back. It took me a long time, months, to do the planning. I had to find out where the campgrounds were that I could stay at. And I don't like to drive a long ways. 300 miles is really the top. So working with an atlas and Google Maps, trying to draw circles on it to kind of show a 300-mile radius, and then finding a campground in there took a long time. And then once I'd find a couple suitable campgrounds, I wanted to make sure that they were nice campgrounds, especially if we were going to stay a few days. And then once you're at a location, what do you do there? I don't know. There were so many times, so many nights that we just hung out in the RV because we didn't really know what to go do. And then many things happened on the road, as it always does on an RV trip. I remember one particular stop. I took my tote off and damaged it because I was using a tow dolly. Ripped the front end off. No big deal. We got a Dremel tool, got it fixed. But at this same campground, as we're packing up to leave, we get everything in, and I start to pull away, and some guy comes running at me, stops me, tells me that the emergency brake on my towed vehicle is still on. So I get out and I look, and I go out there and I look around, and I'm on gravel. There's no damage, so I release the emergency brake, get back in, and I immediately get stopped again by the same guy. I get out, and he's like, "Your awning is out."
Oh, no.
Did I see that the first time? Did he tell me the first time? No. So
Maybe it wasn't out the first time.
Yeah.
so I have to back up a little bit to get the awning back in. But all said and done, it all goes off without a hitch. But I didn't have anybody there as a backup to kind of help me out on those things. We were very new to RVing. So it was just, we learned a lot on that trip on things that you need to be able to do when you're planning an RV trip by yourself. And it's a lot more work. It really isn't a vacation.
Lisa, and you've had some experiences with that?
I have. My husband and I planned a trip, and this was to get to a fantasy RV tour in 2009 to Alaska. But we live in the East Coast, so it's quite a hike to even get there begin the trip. So we had to plan that month-long trip getting to Alaska. And very similar to you, we don't like to travel any more than 300 miles in a day. Look for nice campgrounds. We just don't want to stay anywhere. And we wanted to do some sightseeing along the way. So the amount of research that it took and route planning time, my husband and I were at it for months before we actually came up with a route, campgrounds that we were satisfied with, and the research on things to do. Thankfully, we did not break down on our way there. But I will say, when we reached Dawson Creek in British Columbia, we met up with the fantasy team and just felt relief that we were in good hands. Our planning was successful. We got there with no issues, and we could just sit back and enjoy from that point on.
I think one of the things that people really love about fantasy RV tours is the concept of the tail gunner, and there's someone watching out for you, or is the last one to leave the campground, so that if there are any issues, they can flag you down. We had an experience probably 10 years ago going to Bodie, a great ghost town area, and from where we live near Sacramento. And we knew some people that were leaving about the same time. And long story short, we got to the campground about a day and a half before they did. Well, they decided to go over some of the steepest, windiest roads in the Sierra, and we had routed around. So, one of the things in planning your own trip, it's not just, I like to travel 300 miles or less, but it's like, oh, wow, that road, when you're looking at it on the atlas, doesn't have a lot of detail if you're not paying attention, versus another route that might be quite enjoyable. So that's always something to look out for.
It is, and that's a good point, because when we started our trip to Alaska, we hadn't RV'd before traveling. We RV'd in a campground staying stationary, but we hadn't traveled out west. So altitude was a huge concern for us, and the grades of the mountain terrain that we were going over. Our truck and our fifth wheel were just borderline. It was a heavy fifth wheel. So we had concerns about getting to the top and getting down to the bottom. So we did a lot of topography reviewing of our route to make sure that we weren't going over those types of terrains that you spoke about. So
And it takes a lot of time.
It does. It really does.
Yeah, you mentioned elevation change, and some of the things you don't think about, that it helps if you're traveling with a group, because either a wagon master is going to have already had this experience or one of the guests. So we had to travel over a mountain pass, and we actually stayed at the top of this pass. Again, we're new to RVing at this time. The bed that we had in that RV was one of those like Tempur-Pedic mattresses that had air in them.
Oh, yeah.
So it's after a long day's drive, and I go to just fall down on the bed, and it was like hitting concrete because the elevation had changed quite a bit. Never even had thought about that.
Yeah.
If I had that wagon master or a tail gunner or somebody that had driven the route before, they would say, if you have one of these air mattresses, make sure you deflate it a little bit before you just jump on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So now, Ed, I understand you've done the Canadian Maritimes before. Tell us a little bit about that trip.
The Canadian Maritimes is a great trip. There are challenges, if you try to do it on your own, what's going to happen when you get to the border? There are a lot of campgrounds to choose from. So what campgrounds are you going to use that give you the best benefit of seeing the area? And you want some place, you're right along the Bay of Fundy when you're in the Maritimes area, as you're going through Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. And one of the highlights of that is seeing the Bay of Fundy in action, the huge tidal flows, anywhere from 50 to 100 feet twice a day. And if you don't have a good campground that you can see that from, or know that, hey, there's a kayak tour that goes out and you can kayak along the Bay of Fundy, it's just you need somebody to help you plan.
Yeah, similar to that, we have been to Yellowstone probably 4 or 5 times before we did our tour with Fantasy. And what we realized when we did the tour with Fantasy, we were on a 2 full-day guided bus tour. And even though we had been there 4 or 5 days before, and we spent lots of time there, anywhere from 10 to 15 days, we learned so much about Yellowstone's environment on that bus tour and the animals in the park. We just can't say enough about the types of tours, the professional guides that are there to give you information you would never know about or never find when you're doing it on your own. And that was just really an eye-opener from us about the benefits of Fantasy and what they have to offer.
I think that's one of the true advantages of a curated RV tour. And of those guides, there may be a dozen or more, but Fantasy knows the best too. So of course, that's who they want for their tours. And whether that's in Yellowstone or, like you said, up in New England, Newfoundland, wherever it is, they know the best people to get to learn more about the area. So
absolutely,
always an advantage. Any other tips, thoughts, ideas, things that make sense to you? Cheddar cheese, what do you got?
I think another big benefit to traveling with Fantasy is the camaraderie and the friends that you make. People don't think about that when you're traveling alone. You're isolated. You're with your significant other, and you go off and you sightsee. But when you are with a group, you make lifelong friends and friends that you stay in touch with after the tour. And sometimes you plan different tours with these people. And I just love that about Fantasy. I really do.
Yeah, one of the best things about camping whether you're in an RV or a pickup truck or whatever, is to be able to sit around a campfire at night. It's not the same when you sit around a campfire by yourself. I mean, you still get to watch the flames,
Yes.
maybe have a drink. It's no fun to sing a campfire song to yourself. So when you travel with a group like Fantasy, you have that camaraderie right from the get-go. And there's so much that you can do with that group.
Absolutely.
On all of these videos, that's probably one of the consistent things that people say, in addition to a bucket list trip, an incredible destination, it's the friendships that you make along the way. A dozen couples start out and nobody knows anybody, and then by the time the tour is over, they're the best of friends.
Absolutely.
And they're planning another trip together.
It's absolutely the number one takeaway. So at the end of every one of our tours, I'll ask our guests, what did you enjoy the most on this tour? And I'm hoping they say something like, we had such a great wagon master, or this bus tour was fantastic. Now, the number one thing that almost everybody says are the friends that they meet on the tour. And they'll single a couple of the couples out that they've become best friends with.
Yeah, true.
So for more information, click the link below in the video, or as always, you can go to fantasyrvtours.com.